The taboo isn't just about digging into flesh. The scariest thing is digging up a coffin with no corpse inside. 3 months ago, a construction site dug up 5 coffins. 4 had remains. 1 was empty. Soon after, weird accidents started happening at the site. Within the last 3 days alone, 2 workers ended up in the hospital. I was hired to transport the coffins off the site, but a mob of people blocked my path. The old man leading them wore a Taoist robe, claiming to be an expert hired by the construction company. He threatened me with a sinister tone. Nobody is allowed to touch these 5 coffins for 7 days. Whoever touches them will take a corpse's place inside. Kid, I'm warning you. Don't risk your life just for a few bucks. Throwing away your life over this isn't worth it. With that, the so-called Master Tia called over 4 or 5 burly men to block my truck right in its tracks. The workers were already terrified out of their minds by these coffins, with some even experiencing haunting encounters. Yet he wouldn't let anyone move them, acting completely unreasonable. Uncle Long, maybe we should just forget it. Don't get yourself into trouble. Zhang Shuang urged me anxiously from the passenger seat. This poor girl's mental state was on the verge of collapsing, having already been driven to attempt suicide once. Yet she was still worried about causing trouble for others. Outside, 4 or 5 big guys were standing menacingly in front of the hood. Master Tian's chief thug grew even more arrogant, bouncing up and down as he roared at my cab. My master kindly warned you. I'm telling you right now, don't toast to fine wine only to be forced to drink forfeit. Think you've got the guts to cross us? Seeing Zhang Shuang's tear-filled eyes begging me to give up. Uncle Long, please. I gently comforted her. Don't worry, it's fine. Just stay inside the truck and don't come down. I pushed the door open and stepped out. I've always had an unusual, intimidating appearance, looking fierce and imposing. Ever since I was a kid, people said I looked like Zhang Fei or even some underworld boss. When those thugs saw me, their tough demeanor instantly dropped a few notches. Each of them was holding a rubber baton, but seeing me, they hesitated. I didn't say a word, just reached over to the side materials and pulled out a thick steel rebar. Hold on, let's not fight. The project manager, Zhang Sheng, who had been watching nervously from the sidelines, realized things were getting out of hand and rushed over to intervene. Gentlemen, let's talk this out calmly. Zhang Xing was caught between a rock and a hard place. That Master Tia was personally hired by the head of the construction firm, so Zhang Xing couldn't afford to offend him. But on the other hand, panic was spreading through the entire crew. Everyone was terrified, and the workers were quietly whispering among themselves that the empty coffin was meant to devour people, and if they didn't send it away soon, someone was bound to die. Plus, the police had already tracked down the hometowns and living relatives of the 4 deceased owners of the other coffins, and had officially requested the construction site to return the remains home. But after all these bizarre incidents, the site's regular drivers were too scared to even touch the 5 coffins. Me, an ordinary taxi driver delivering a fare, suddenly seemed like a godsend savior. Master Tia sized me up from head to toe. What a fierce-looking fiend. No wonder you dare to wade into muddy waters. Listen up, kid. Just because you've got a fierce look and a hot temper doesn't mean you can run wild here. Those 5 coffins, you can't touch them. I said no, and that's final. I dragged the steel bar along the ground as I marched forward. Nobody dared to block my way. I walked right past Master Tia, straight to the open pit where the 5 coffins were unearthed. Right now, it was high noon, and the sunlight beat down fiercely. The excavated pit had no shelter at all, leaving those 5 bright red coffins exposed entirely under the glaring sun. These coffins had been buried underground for over 20 years, and the lacquer on their surfaces was already peeling and battered. Just as I prepared to step down into the pit, an elderly worker stopped me, driven by his own conscience. He offered a word of warning. You better think twice about this. The 2 workers who handled these 5 coffins earlier both met with disaster. One of them was working in broad daylight when he suddenly fell into the rebar framework and broke several ribs. The other one started acting completely out of his mind that very night, jumped straight off his building rooftop, and is still lying in a coma right now. I nodded in gratitude to the old worker, then leapt down into the pit anyway. The moment I got close to those 5 coffins, I caught a faint, lingering fragrance in the air. This scent made my heart skip a beat, because I had smelled this exact same odor before, right on Zhang Shuang. Zhang Shuang and I were complete strangers before all this, and I wasn't helping her for money. 7 days ago, as evening fell, a drunk driver had careened his sedan right onto a pedestrian crosswalk, just as my daughter was stepping out of the supermarket. That car was already barreling straight toward her, and at only 11 years old, she had zero ability to react in time. By the time I got the news and rushed to the scene, my heart felt like it was tearing apart. The ground was littered with shattered bumpers and glass shards, alongside glaring skid marks, and a massive pool of bright red blood. My wife had passed away years ago, leaving me with just my son and daughter. If anything happened to my little girl, I couldn't even imagine what would become of me. But at that critical life or death moment, a passing girl risked her life to dash forward and save my daughter. That girl was Zhang Shuang, but when the paramedics finally arrived, Zhang Shuang had already vanished, leaving behind only a pool of her own blood on the street. I followed the trail of blood droplets down the road, which led me straight to the rooftop of a nearby apartment building. Zhang Shuang was up there planning to end her life, perhaps because she had reached the absolute edge of despair. She desperately needed someone to listen to her. I slowly approached her by calling out in my daughter's name. She sat right on the edge of the roof, bleeding, and poured out her tragic story to me. This young girl wasn't someone with a dark destiny. She had lost her parents when she was little and grew up in an orphanage. Through years of working part-time while studying, she had finally managed to get into a decent university, always striving hard to build a life for herself. But ever since a nightmare 3 months ago, everything in Zhang Shuang's life completely shattered. Zhang Shuang told me that around noon on that fateful day, she suddenly heard the loud sound of firecrackers outside. The string of explosions was deafening, yet strangely distorted, as if it kept shifting positions, coming closer and closer to her. Zhang Shuang covered her ears tightly, but within a split second, she plunged headfirst into a pitch-black space. The space was damp and sinking downward, forcing her to lie flat on her back, without even enough room to stretch out her arms. She reached out to grope around, but her hands brushed against hard wooden walls. Then, that enclosed space began to shake violently. She vaguely heard voices speaking outside, and even thought she recognized her parents' voices. Only the fragmented bits of conversation made her blood run cold. She heard someone say, "Seal the lid tightly. She's still breathing in there." In that instant, Zhang Shuang's terror reached its absolute peak. She began hammering frantically against the lid sealing her inside, but she slowly felt her surroundings grow crowded, as choking, heavy dirt poured down through the cracks above. Right then, she lost the ability to breathe entirely, believing she was losing her mind. She feared her declining mental state would become a burden to others. She consulted numerous doctors and took countless medications, yet her symptoms only worsened. She began seeing terrifying, inexplicable visions in broad daylight, sometimes spotting people carrying a red coffin across campus. Zhang Shuang started screaming in absolute panic. Just then, someone gave her a hard push from behind. It felt as if she had suddenly broken free from that cramped space. The exact moment she was about to get out, she glanced back over her shoulder. She wanted to see who had saved her, but the face she saw when she turned around was still her own. Ever since waking up from that dream, Zhang Shuang felt an inexplicable terror toward her roommates and friends. And after that day, she had terrifying nightmares almost every single night. In her dreams, the time she spent locked away grew longer and longer, and that suffocating sense of despair grew heavier each time. Every time, it seemed like another version of herself rescued her, but that other self seemed to be trapped in that space forever. her. She thought she might be losing her mind, and she was terrified that her mental state would bring trouble to others. She kept seeing doctors and taking loads of medication, but her symptoms only grew worse. In broad daylight, she began seeing horrifying, inexplicable sights. Sometimes she would see people carrying a coffin across campus. Once, she even saw her roommate giving birth right in the dorm, with bright red blood staining the windows. Her roommate's belly was absurdly swollen and huge. Yet in reality, her roommate hadn't even returned to the dorm that day. Having suffered like this for nearly 3 years, Zhang Shuang simply couldn't hold on anymore. She sat on the rooftop crying, looked at me, and said, "Uncle, just forget about me. This is just my fate. I know that once I die, everything will be over. You saved my daughter's life, so I'm taking responsibility for yours no matter what. Just look at this as your final act of closure, and trust me just this once. I'm not any kind of professional occult master. I'm just a truck driver." But just like that Master Tia said, I have an intimidating, fierce look, coupled with a naturally tough horoscope and heavy life energy. So I'm not afraid of those supernatural disturbances. If they're fierce, I'm even fiercer. I'm already past middle age now, with my parents having passed away from illness, and my wife gone early, leaving me with just a son and daughter, along with aging family. My family is everything to me. Zhang Shuang saved my daughter, so there's no way I could stand by and do nothing. Over the past few days, I have been looking into Zhang Shuang's background. The 5 coffins that Zhang Shuang had seen in her dreams, arrayed in that pit, were real. 3 days ago, I heard about these 5 coffins being unearthed at this construction site. Come to think of it, 3 months ago, when Zhang Shuang first started having those terrifying nightmares, was precisely when construction began on this very site. We had also sought out capable masters to look at Zhang Shuang's condition, and that master had said, Zhang Shuang's fate was fatally entangled with those 5 coffins, placing her in a desperate 9 deaths out of 10 situation. The only path to survival was to return those coffins to their hometown. That was why I brought Zhang Shuang straight to this construction site. This site was originally intended for a large shopping mall, having stood there for 20 years since its completion. I heard the original boss came from Hong Kong or Taiwan, and when it was first built, they hired many feng shui masters to survey the land. After the mall was built, business boomed tremendously, once making it the most bustling spot in the city. However, that prosperity didn't last forever. A few years after opening, rumors started spreading that the mall was haunted. The rumors grew wilder by the day, slowly driving people away until nobody wanted to go there. Roughly 5 or 6 years ago, the mall closed down completely. Now, they were planning to build a city park here, meaning all the old structures had to be demolished, and the exact spot where those 5 coffins were unearthed was right in the flower bed directly in front of the old mall. That flower bed used to be a landmark of the shopping center. Those 5 bright red coffins radiated an eerie, chilling aura even in broad daylight. Not a single person dared to step forward and help me lift the coffins. I grabbed the ropes to secure the first coffin myself, while the surrounding workers watched nervously from afar. Those 5 coffins appeared to be made of fir wood, built a size smaller than ordinary coffins, weighing only 200 to 300 pounds each. Hoisting them and looping the ropes wasn't too difficult for me. Just as I ignored that Master Tia, he walked sinuously over to the edge of the pit, and with a slight twitch of his wooden cane, the coffin I had just lifted dropped back down. With a loud thud, I clenched my teeth so hard, the veins on my neck bulged, and the muscles in my arm strained to the limit. Yet that coffin seemed nailed to the ground, not moving an inch. I looked at Master Tia, who was watching me with a smug smirk at the corner of his mouth. He had claimed earlier that these 5 coffins wouldn't let me move them unless he allowed it, but I refused to believe in such evil nonsense. I gripped the ropes tighter, bent my knees, planted my feet firmly against the ground, and prepared to lift. Vein after bulging vein crawled up from my calves to my neck. The short talisman in Master Tian's hand began to burn with a dim, flickering light. Looking somewhat alarmed, he glared up at me. I let out a deep roar and surged upward with all my might. That coffin shuddered slightly before coming loose with a sharp creak, actually hauled up by my brute strength. At the exact same time, the cane in Master Tian's hand snapped sharply down the middle, breaking into pieces. Staggering back, his flustered junior disciples rushed to catch him. Meanwhile, I steadily looped the rope around the coffin, securing it tightly. By then, that stifling, pervasive fragrance seemed even stronger, and I faintly felt as if someone was crying nearby. Over on the other side, Master Tia pushed away his disciples, pointed furiously at me, and shouted, "Go on, pin him down." Although his 4 or 5 bodyguards still hesitated, they had no choice but to obey Master Tian's command. One of the thugs leapt down into the pit, but before he even touched me, he inexplicably tripped over a rebar framework, pitching forward to smash straight into one of the coffins. As the thug grabbed onto the coffin and scrambled clumsily back to his feet, a massive chunk of his forehead was somehow caved in. Fresh blood gushed out, and the dark red droplets of blood splashing down landed all over the surface of the coffin, instantly absorbed by the crimson wood in the blink of an eye. Someone's dead. A ghost killed someone. Someone in the panicked crowd shrieked at the top of their lungs. The already terrified workers immediately bolted in all directions, throwing the entire scene into absolute chaos. At this point, project manager Zhang Qing couldn't hold back any longer either. He rushed over to Master Tia and pleaded, "Master, these 5 coffins have to be sent away. If you keep messing around like this, our project is completely finished." Before Master Tia could reply, I suddenly heard a voice amid the chaotic crowd. Zhang Shuang crying out frantically, "Uncle!" And people screaming about a fatality. Seeing the crowd scattering everywhere, and people screaming about a fatality, she panicked, crying that I was in danger, and scrambled down from the truck to search for me. Master Tia instantly spotted Zhang Shuang running toward the edge of the pit. His fierce expression froze for a second, then shifted into sudden delight. He looked from Zhang Shuang to me, then curled the corner of his mouth into a smirk and said, "Well, never mind then. Since this brother isn't afraid of danger, and insists on making this trip, I won't meddle any further. However, I'm at least friends with President Liu of your company, so I can't just stand by and ignore this. How about this? I'll have my disciple, Fan Chan, go along with the 2 of you. If anything unexpected happens on the road, at least he can lend a hand." Zhang Shuang never expected that this so-called Master Tia would flip his attitude so fast. He can lend a hand. Never expected this fellow would flip fast on the flip side. But at least we dumped this hot potato. Besides, Fan Chan had to go along too, because once the coffins were delivered, he still had to report to the police. The injured bodyguard was sent to the hospital, not dead, but scared out of his wits. In the end, I had to load the coffins myself. At this point, we couldn't be picky. The coffins were packed together, and I secured them with ropes, covering them with a layer of yellow and white silk. Before leaving, I burned some paper money to appease any spirits. I hadn't planned on bringing Fan Qian along, but Zhang Shuang's ordeal was a narrow escape. Master Tia definitely knew more than we did. Keeping his disciple with us might actually help us out on the road. That sealed coffin definitely knows more than us. I need to keep this apprentice in my hands. Maybe she can help me out when bidding. After getting in, I had Fan Qian sit in the front passenger seat. Zhang Shuang and Zhang Qian sat in the back. The original site of those 5 coffins was in a relatively remote village, and it wasn't too far from us. We set off at noon. We should arrive before dusk. Transporting those 5 coffins, we finally drove out of the construction site. Zhang Qing let out a long sigh of relief. He took a drag from his cigarette when we went to find him this morning. With that Master Tia around, the communication had been a bit awkward. He was somewhat curious about the sudden appearance of Zhang Shuang and me. Hey siblings, what's your family name? Long Zhangge. I don't know if I was just being sensitive. Fan Qian, sitting in the front passenger seat, the moment she heard my name, suddenly turned her head to look at me, but she quickly looked away again. Rolong, you've been driving for quite a while, right? The master's at our construction site. Refused to touch this job no matter what. How come Rolong suddenly came looking for it? My connection to these 5 coffins runs a bit deep. I didn't go into detail. Zhang Xing is also a sensible man who knows how to handle things, and he didn't ask any further. He just sighed coldly. As long as they can be safely sent back, that's fine. Let's hope nothing else goes wrong. I opened my mouth and asked, don't the police know where these coffins are being sent? Zhang Xing didn't hide anything either. When the police came on the first day, they opened the coffins to inspect them. There were nameplates inside those coffins. The deceased's name and native place were clearly engraved, since they weren't ancient coffins, and there might still be family members around. The police didn't take them back. They verified it with local departments, confirmed they died of natural causes, and left us in charge of sending them back. Fan Qian sat in the passenger seat. She sneered coldly for a moment. I ignored her completely, and continued asking Zhang Xing, on the day the coffins were opened, did you see what was inside? Zhang Xing took a cold drag of his cigarette. I saw they were all wrapped in cloth. You guys might not believe it when I say this. Among the 4 coffins opened, not a single one held an adult. They were all children. I felt Zhang Shuang cowering behind me, giving a fierce shudder. You bet. It's pure evil, except for that empty coffin. The other coffins had multiple nails driven into them. The seams were also sealed with wax. Opening them took a huge amount of effort. Zhang Xing is a veteran earth mover, under old buildings scheduled for demolition. Finding things like this wasn't his first rodeo either. That empty coffin was clearly, deliberately buried under the floral platform, and the timing was exactly 20 years ago. Back then, this Jiaxing trading company was extremely successful around here. When I was a kid, if my family wanted to rent a shop there, we had to pull strings and use every connection. Who would have thought they were pulling this kind of stuff behind the scenes? Were there any other things inside that empty coffin? A piece of rotten wood, also wrapped in white cloth, but no corpse. While talking, I had already driven onto the highway, maybe because it had just passed noon. The ground temperature was a bit high, and the carriage was also quite warm. Suddenly, I caught that fragrance again. That scent was like some kind of woody aroma, but smelling it for too long made one feel dizzy. It felt like the smell of high-grade incense. Just at this moment, my gaze swept across the rearview mirror, and I suddenly found Zhang Qing staring right at me. But when I turned my head over, Zhang Qing was looking out the window instead. I instinctively felt something was wrong, and tried my best to keep my focus on driving. But right after that, Zhang Shuang suddenly let out a cry from behind, while desperately curling herself into a ball. She pointed at Zhang Xing and screamed, "Don't come over here." Zhang Xing looked sinisterly at Zhang Shuang. He made no reaction to Zhang Shuang's screams. Instead,